Hello, today is June 21st, 2023. This presentation is intended to inform and guide FDOT and its local agency partners with the activities and requirements of the urban area boundary and functional classification process. This integrated process is critical to the transportation planning and the work program and defines the federal aid eligibility of roadways in the state. The goal of this presentation is to encourage a collaborative and efficient review between FDOT, local agency partners, and Federal Highway Administration. The outcome of this process creates official data, maps, statistics, which are all submitted by the department to the Federal Highway Administration and state legislator. This webinar has been recorded for training purposes. Presenting this information to you today are staff from the Transportation Data and Analytics Office, located here in Tallahassee, Florida. Speaking with you now is Joel Worrell. I'm a section manager here with FDOT, and presenting along with me are Jerry Scott, who's our multimodal data system coordinator, Makaran Gawade, transportation project planner, and Brittany Wood, our transportation data specialist. Our team here is responsible for guiding FDOT through the process and coordinating the review of the adjusted urban area boundary maps and functional classification applications of roadways provided by FDOT districts. Our team will coordinate the review process with Federal Highways and pursue the final approvals to complete the process. This agenda for this presentation will include a brief overview of the process. We will provide information on the department's procedure and handbook, which are resources documenting and guiding the process. Also, we will delve into the guidelines and considerations to adjust an urban area boundary and functionally classify a roadway. Listeners will also receive information on the do's and don'ts of the process and will be able to receive visual examples of best practices and things to avoid. The background, which has been included here, provides a high-level view of the urban area boundary adjustment process and the functional classification review process. So what is an urban area? Historically, in 1790, the U.S. Census revises urban areas every 10 years, which has been based on population counts collected from the decennial census. In its recent census, the U.S. Census announced through the Federal Register an update to the criteria and methodology of how they define an urban area. The urban area has now incorporated geographic information and land use to define an urban area. FHWA and DOTs across the nation use this information to determine what roadways are federally aid eligible for federal and state funding programs. As U.S. Census is responsible for defining the urban area, Federal Highway and DOTs use this defined urban area for transportation purposes. State DOTs have the option of adjusting or smoothing the U.S. Census defined urban area boundary to be more consistent with the transportation features of the state. In order to be efficient, FDOT performs a review of the functional classification of a roadway in conjunction with the urban area boundary. So what is functional classification? The definition of the functional classification of a roadway describes how the roadway segment functions through the network. The categories are defined by Federal Highway, who advises the state to reassess the functional classification of its roadways. Florida's roadways are counted, calculated, and officially reported to Federal Highway and the state legislator. So why is this important? There are several areas that outline the benefits and impacts here. Project funding. The funding of the transportation projects is important as federal formula funds are provided to the work program. The functional classification of a roadway also supports the designation of federal transportation designations, including the National Highway System and the Strategic Highway Network. Its programs and partners also are affected by the definition and adjustment of an urban area. Transportation management areas are defined in the process, which are urban areas with more than 200,000 population. Metropolitan planning organizations in the state are also developed or adjusted through this process, and transportation plans are adjusted accordingly. Data analysis is also a big benefit of this process, as transportation data users benefit by being able to perform analysis activities of the transportation network. In this slide, this timeline provides a schedule of activities FDOT and its local agency partners should follow as much as possible to complete the process efficiently and timely. The U.S. Census Bureau released the urban areas in December 2022 to January 2023. In May of 2023, FDOT provided notice to the districts and its MPOs to begin the adjustment process and encouraged stakeholders to have meetings to review and adjust their respective urban areas. FDOT encourages collaborative workshops to engage stakeholders and to complete the review by the end of May 2024. In the summer of 2023, Federal Highway has provided the list of designated TMAs on their website. And in the fall of 2023, FDOT and the MPOC will provide its allocation formulas of PO funds to federal highways, and each MPO will be submitting their portion plans and their new Metropolitan Planning Organization boundary maps. In May of 2024, we here in Tallahassee will need the draft adjusted urban area maps and any functional classification applications provided to us and to begin the review process with federal highways. Any reviewed and approved maps or applications in 2024 must be submitted to federal highways in a data set in that same year it was approved in. The adjustments to any urban areas in Florida must be finalized by FDOT and federal highways by December 2024. Any functional classification review applications may be provided beyond the end of 2024, and any functional classification applications approved in 2025 must be submitted to federal highways by FDOT by the end of 2025. In April 2025, FDOT will be submitting the final adjusted urban areas to federal highways through the Highway Performance Monitoring System. Our office will be providing the data to FDOT's business systems, such as the financial management system and maintenance systems. The roles and responsibilities of this collaborative process include federal highways, FDOT, and its local agency partners. Federal Highway provides the guidance to the state and also supports the review and approval process performed by FDOT and its local agency partners. All the adjusted urban areas and functional classification applications must be approved by federal highways in the state. FDOT takes the lead role to coordinate the process through its districts, with its metropolitan planning organizations, counties, and local municipalities. FDOT Central Office provides the resources and coordinates the review of the draft maps and functional classification reviews to complete the process. Our office is responsible for collecting the data and information from these maps and reviews and will submit them to Federal Highway through the Highway Performance Monitoring System. The FDOT districts are the boots on the ground staff responsible for executing the process with the local agency partners and developing the draft adjusted urban area maps, as well as conducting the functional classification review of roadways on the state highway system and off the state highway system in their jurisdiction. The districts will be provided the draft applications and reviews to Federal Highway and FDOT Central Office for the final approval. Finally, the organizations of MPOs, TPOs will be responsible for developing their planning boundary maps from the U.S. Census urban areas in coordination with the FDOT district and local agencies. The planning organizations are responsible for updating its apportion plans and governing member boards through this process. Larger organizations in the state typically host its regional workshops to perform a collaborative review. In other regions, FDOT may host a review or workshop to facilitate the review process. And in Florida, this process can be decided upon what works best for the district, organization, or local agency partner.
So we're providing an update on the urban area boundary and functional classification procedure and handbook. So the procedure was published in May of 2023. We updated the responsible office for the urban area review. Previously it was forecasting and trends, and now it's the TDA office. We included U.S. Census Bureau and FHWA criteria and definitions. And then we added a process for the governor's delegation. So back in 2014, all the maps were signed off by the district secretary statewide. Leading up to the 2020 process, we received an email from FHWA stating that the governor of each state would have to sign off on these maps. So we reached out to the governor's office to get a delegation letter, and we received that delegation letter, and it will allow our department secretary to sign off on these maps or his delegates. So we should be good moving forward there. We also clarified 2 additional processes within the procedure. The first is interim updates for functional classification. Back in 2014, when the fund class was approved and signed off, the very next day, fund class started to change. Weekly, monthly, yearly, fund class is susceptible to change based on new construction, realignments, changes to the character of existing roads throughout the state. So we wanted to add that to the procedure so everyone's aware that, just because the maps are signed off on a certain date, that doesn't mean that they're concrete for the next 10 years. We also added standardization for the map package requirements. So the handbook, we're currently working on that and hope to have it ready by late July or early August. We included the U.S. Census Bureau and FHWA criteria. We're including best practices, GIS formatting examples, flowcharts for both the UAB and the FC process, and then map templates and requirements. So next we'll go over the urban area boundary and functional classification update process. So you can see here that the process by FHWA is recommended on a 12-month cycle for the urban area boundaries. At a minimum, the census boundaries should not be eliminated or adjusted. You have to include the minimum census boundaries when submitting the adjustments to TDA. We recommend that you build and share an understanding of the game plan with your local partners in the district. You're going to generate maps and share them electronically. So we're definitely pushing GIS this time around. And then we just encourage that the locals in the district work towards timely delivery of the revisions. So this is the urban area boundary process flow chart. You can see in the dark blue, we've got TDA, and then that teal color is the district responsibilities until the process is complete. So FHWA will request the new urban area boundaries every 10 years. TDA will update their procedures, handbooks, and training. We will obtain the census boundary files from FHWA, provide the files to the district with new census boundaries in GIS format, which we're doing that through our data hub here in FDOT. From there, the districts will develop and draft new urban boundaries with the MPOs and local government staff. Those draft boundaries will be reviewed by TDA and FHWA. If there are revisions needed, we'll send them back to the districts to coordinate with the locals on any changes. If they're approved, we'll get the signatures from the locals through the district. And then from there, we'll acquire the FDOT secretary and FHWA signatures. And then we'll distribute the various signed off maps and update the roadway characteristics inventory database, specifically feature 124. All right, so the functional classification review process from FHWA, this is supposed to take place after the urban area boundary review takes place. So you got 12 months for urban area boundaries, and then an additional 22 to 24 months after that to submit the fund class to the feds. So basically, we're creating a multi-agency review team. So the district, the locals, the MPOs, the counties will build and share understanding of the game plan, so much like the urban area boundaries. And we're going to lean heavily on GIS, so you're generating maps and sharing electronically. And then you're just working toward the timeline that we have for you. All right, so we've got the functional classification process flowchart. This is much like the urban area boundary process flowchart. TDA is in blue, the districts in teal. So FHWA will request review of fund class every 10 years. TDA updates the procedures, handbooks, and training. TDA will provide the maps to the districts with the new census boundaries in GIS format. From there, the districts will meet with the MPOs and the locals to define adjustments to the functional classification and coordinate with other counties and districts and states at the boundaries. Maps will be drafted along with a spreadsheet. They'll get submitted to TDA. TDA will review them as well as FHWA. If revisions are needed, we'll kick it back to the district to work with the locals on any changes. If it is approved, we will then submit it to the districts to get final signature from the MPOs and locals. And from there, we will acquire FHWA signature. And then, of course, we'll distribute the map and then update feature 121 in RCI. This is the proposed functional classification that will finalize the data. All right, so the urban area boundary functional classification map requirements. So we're going to have to adhere to the line symbology required by FDOT and FHWA. FHWA has a specific color scheme that they want for the urban and rural splits on functional classification, so we'll provide that. There is a specific coordinate projection system that you should use. We'll detail the legend for urban boundary and functional classification symbology. And then we have signature blocks and date blocks. Of course, we're including the FDOT logo, when the file was created, who prepared it, the county title, the compass rose, the map scale in miles, and then just any inset maps that we need of the main urban areas within the county. So basically what we did in 2010. All right, so the UAB GIS data format will provide an adjusted urban area boundary data set to TDA within an Esri geodatabase feature class format, and then in the specified projection coordinate system. And then you can see on the right the specific data that we're needing. You'll have the year for which the data applies, 2020, the census urban code, the urban name, census population, census housing units, census land area, adjusted urban area boundary, and then the polygon feature. So functional classification reviews. So you'll use a GIS geodatabase format required to perform an expedited review. The district submission should include at a minimum the roadway ID, the beginning mile point, the end mile point, the average annual daily traffic, number of lanes, and then refer to the form for required attributes. So then we provided a screenshot of the existing functional classification application, and we're not intending you to fill out an application for each adjustment. It would just be too daunting of a task. But we did want you to see the data elements that FHWA reviews when we do submit an fund class application. So some of these elements are susceptible to be included. We are still working with FHWA on just exactly what fund class elements they're looking to see. So we will finalize those elements in the future and coordinate with you on that outcome.
Hello. Next, we will discuss some of the urban area boundary adjustment guidelines and considerations defined by FHWA. The first step in determining how to adjust census urban areas is to obtain the applicable supporting data and the documentation, which includes but is not limited to the data sets listed here. We have listed some suggestions and the recommended statewide data sources here, but if there is local data available that you feel is more accurate and representative of your area, then please feel free to leverage those local data sets. So obviously, one of the first data sets that you would need is the 2020 U.S. Census Urban Area data, which we provide on our hub site. Additionally, land use showing areas of recent growth, you can get that from local data sources, or you can compare land use data provided by Florida Geographic Data Library or parcel data from Department of Revenue. Next is roadway networks. Obviously, you would need to use the FDOT RCI LRS linear referencing system, transit routes, port locations, military installations, other significant traffic generators, hydrography, municipal boundaries, and the latest aerial imagery. Here we've listed the considerations we are going to be reviewing in these next few slides. Please remember that these are considerations and not requirements. The only official requirement is that an adjusted boundary includes the original urban area delineated by the U.S. Census Bureau in its entirety. So the first consideration would be to include the entire municipality. So you would want to consider the city limits. The second one would be to include areas with urban characteristics. So any land use that you might consider urban relative to the rest of the area, you can go ahead and include that. Include large significant traffic generators. These can be shopping centers, warehouses, anything like that. Another consideration would be for the boundary to follow municipal limits or physical features. So you would want it to, follow a river or those city limits, a lake, anything like that. You might want to consider expanding the boundary just so it's more smooth. The boundary should also be simple without irregularities. So no jagged edges or anything like that. And then the boundary should not split roadways or ramps. So you should edit the boundary so that it covers an entire roadway. It doesn't, your boundary is not going down the middle of a roadway. So the first one, include the entire municipality. So the adjusted urban area should consider the official municipal boundaries, and an effort should be made to ensure that the urban area is adjusted to fully encapsulate municipalities. So in the example on the left here, the red are the city limits of the city of Tallahassee, and the blues are the urban area. So on the right is an example of how it could be revised to include all the city limits or municipalities. And once again, this is not a requirement, it's just a suggestion. The adjusted urban area can also be adjusted to include any areas with urban characteristics, such as large shopping centers, residential neighborhoods, or any other developed areas. So in the example on the left, this shows a shopping center being left out of the US Census urban area, and then on the right, it's been revised to include the shopping center. The adjusted urban area boundary should also be adjusted to include all large traffic generators that are within a reasonable distance from the urban area. And a reasonable distance can be defined using common sense. So a fringe area, public parks, large places of assembly, and large industrial plants are some examples of traffic generators. And so here's another example of a large shopping center on the left, or I think it's a Walmart, which can be considered a large traffic generator in this area. And then on the right, the boundary has been adjusted to include the Walmart. The adjusted urban area boundary should be defined so that its physical location is easy to discern from data shown on the map. So whenever possible, the boundary should follow political jurisdictional boundaries or physical features such as rivers, streams, transmission lines, railroads, streets, or highways. So on the left, the urban area leaves out the municipal limits of the city of Gainesville. And on the right, it's been adjusted to include those city limits, and the new adjusted boundary follows the municipal boundary limits. So after the adjusted urban area boundary has been defined using all of those other factors and considerations, the remaining boundary irregularities can be minimized to avoid confusion that irregular boundaries can create. So for example, on the left, this shows an urban area associated with Crestview, and it shows various jagged lines. So the example on the right shows how it was adjusted where certain boundaries have been smoothed, so they are simple with no jagged edges and no irregularities. Finally, boundaries cannot be drawn in the middle of a divided highway or ramp. The divided highway or ramp should be either completely within or out of the urban boundary. So the example on the left shows a boundary with a ramp inside of it. On the right, it's extended to include both ramps and both of the roadway features all the way up to the edge of that roadway. And the boundary should be one contiguous area. So the adjusted urban boundary can also be adjusted so that it's one single contiguous area without a bunch of little parts. So the example on the left shows a census area with multiple separated urban area boundaries. And then the example on the right shows how each discrete urban area boundary is contained within one contiguous polygon shape. So it's been extended so that everything's connected.
All right, so next we're going to talk about the functional classification guidelines and considerations. So what is functional classification? This is the way streets and highways are grouped into classes based on the type of character that they provide the road network. Two of the main concerns when looking at functional classification is mobility and accessibility. So mobility, we're looking at the ability for traffic to pass through a defined area based on the reasonable amount of time. And then accessibility is the amount of access there is to the road. And this is between the land use activities within a defined area. So on the right, you can see where we break down less mobility versus more mobility. And you can see most roads as they enter our RCI database, they're designated as a local road. And then determining the traffic volume will detail whether or not they, what type of classification they get, whether it's minor collector on through to the interstate designation. So you can see for local road, there's no through traffic. And then for interstates, there's little local traffic. So it's kind of like a common sense approach. More access, it's going to be local. Less access, it's going to be interstate based. These are some of the criteria that FHWA considers when reviewing functional classification modifications. So you can see the types of trips being served, travel speeds, trip distance, interval spacing, population center, thresholds, the expected volumes, the traffic volumes, network characteristics, and then mileage extents. And then the graphic, you can just see where we have a continuous freeway and the various designations that exist in a various snapshot of our network. So now we've got the decision tree. So here we will present considerations for assigning and updating functional classification to roadways. The fund class system groups roadways into logical series of decisions based upon the character of travel service they provide. You should start this process starting from assigning the function of an arterial by its level of access, limited or full, through its non-arterial full access. So how does FDOT use functional classification? The main purpose of it is federal aid eligibility. So that's determining whether a road is open to federal funding from FHWA. We also use it for our highway performance monitoring system, so our HPMS system. This is where we basically summarize all the functional classification throughout the state and submit it on an annual basis to FHWA. Planning uses it to assist in long-range transportation plans. Although roadway design doesn't use functional classification as the, I guess as the main contributor when designing roads, functional classification is still considered as part of that process. And then traffic management, they assist in managing traffic flow and congestion based on fund class. So there are a variety of factors that can influence the functional classification of a roadway. Continuity, this is a roadway of a higher classification, and it should not connect to a single roadway of a lower classification. There are some exceptions. Trip length, longer trips indicate more principal arterial use, while shorter trips indicate more local collector use. Access points, in theory, surface arterials provide the least access for grade roads. Access management tries to preserve function. Speed limit, the higher the speed limit, the higher the functional classification. Route spacing, ideally, regular and logical spacing between routes of different classification exists. Arterials are typically spaced at a greater interval than collectors, which are spaced at a much greater interval than locals. Annual average daily traffic, the higher the traffic volume, the higher the functional classification. Number of lanes, the higher the number of lanes, the higher the functional classification. And lastly, the connections to activity centers. Highly significant roadways connect large activity centers and carry longer distance travel between and through regions. All right, so functional classification and trip purpose. For a trip purpose, identified by concept of service and consideration of proximity. It is not necessary for a road to go directly to the main entrance of a traffic generator for it to serve that traffic generator. Several connections may exist between the primary access route and the traffic generator. We will cover all of the trip purposes in the next few slides. FHWA has 12 types of trip purposes that they use, and you can basically determine your functional classification category based on these trip purposes. So if you're suggesting the road is a minor collector, it should meet trip purpose number 11. All right, so here we'll cover FHWA's trip purposes 1 through 6. So number 1, we're going to travel to and through urbanized areas. These are primary routes that connect one urbanized area to another. Typically, there will only be one route of trip purpose 1 per urban area. And selecting the primary route between two adjacent urbanized areas when more than one direct route exists, the district should first consider the route that extends to the largest number of distant urban areas. If that criteria does not provide a clear selection, the district may then consider which road serves the largest volume of traffic traveling between the two adjacent urban areas. A connected urban area may be in another state. Two routes may be considered when the amount of travel in a given corridor connecting two urban areas is substantially served by trips on more than one highway. This is also true when an urban area is so geographically large as to result in multiple corridors having been established. This two-route option will be applied in limited cases. The TDA office will review two route options as proposed by the district and present them to FHWA for consideration. In general, the use of multiple highways to serve trip needs of a single corridor for this trip purpose should be recognized only when the two facilities are of different access control types. For example, one is limited access and the other is not. I-10 is a limited access facility. US 90 that parallels I-10 is not a limited access facility. So for trip purpose 2, travel to and through small urban areas. These are primary routes that connect one small urban area to an adjacent small urban area, or to the network of roads connecting urban areas to each other. If there is no urban area in the county, connections should be made to the county seat. Trip purpose number 3, national defense. A national defense route is identified as a primary national strategic highway network, STRANET route. National defense routes also include connector routes identified in the STRANET collector atlas. Trip purpose number 4, interstate and regional commerce. Routes serving this trip purpose are identified by relatively high volumes of freight movements over long distances. A U.S. route may often indicate that the designated route serves the primary purpose of interstate commerce. Those roads that serve the purpose of travel to and through urban areas are considered to serve the needs of regional commerce and thus meet both trip purposes and vice versa. Identification of this trip purpose may involve evaluating the appropriateness of existing U.S. route designations. Trip purpose number 5, access to airports, seaports, and major rail terminals or intermodal transfer facilities. These major routes that provide access to regional or international airports, seaports handling ocean-going or river barge traffic, and rail truck intermodal facilities are designated by FDOT and approved by FHWA. For the last trip purpose on this slide, the access to major public facilities. A route to the major point of entrance to a major public facility is considered the primary access route. Major public facilities are distinguished from minor public facilities by their frequency of use and customer service. The general guide for selecting facilities meeting this purpose is to identify those for which the generated traffic would substantially impact the performance of connecting roads. For example, the number and frequency of trips to or from the facility would place a significant demand on the facility. For the purposes of this presentation, major public facilities are state or private universities, community colleges, regional medical centers, natural attractions such as beaches, rivers, and state parks that draw from a regional area and serve an average daily attendance of 1,000 persons in a single area, man-made attractions such as theme parks that attract audiences from a regional area, publicly owned cultural and historic facilities such as performing arts centers, civic centers, and museums, and those that attract audiences from a regional area. All right, so this next slide, we will continue with the trip purposes from FHWA for trip purposes 7 through 12. So trip purpose number 7, access to minor public facilities. A route providing access to the major point of entrance to a minor public facility is considered the primary access route. For the purposes of this webinar, minor public facilities are those not meeting the requirements listed in trip purpose 6, access to major public facilities, and include man-made attractions and publicly owned cultural and historical facilities that attract local audiences. Trip purpose 8, interconnection of major thoroughfares. A route that provides a high volume cross connection between roads that meet at least 2 of the trip purposes, 1 through 6, qualifies for this trip purpose. The intent is to ensure that the trips being observed are for through traffic seeking to reach the distant major road. Trip purpose number 9, interconnection of minor thoroughfares. A route that provides cross connection between roads that meet at least 1 of the trip purposes 1 through 7 qualifies for this trip purpose. Trip purpose 10, access to concentrated property use areas. This is a route that connects major thoroughfares to concentrations of property use, such as the primary connection to a community, large residential subdivision, neighborhood shopping center, or a public facility serving a large audience. Trip purpose number 11, access to rural diffuse property use areas and lower density urban residential and commercial industrial areas. This is a route that connects major thoroughfares to diffused areas of a single or mixed property use, and lower density urban residential and commercial industrial areas serve this trip purpose. Such areas include the primary connection to a rural farming area consisting of large acreage tracts and scattered small residential developments or in urban areas, lower density residential and commercial industrialized areas. And for trip purpose, 12 is basically everything else. If you haven't classified anything 1 through 11, you've got a local access road on your hands. So that one's pretty straightforward. All right, so functional classification update triggers. As we mentioned early on with the interim fund class process, functional classification can change over time. And even though they can change over time, most fund class designations remain stable. When updating your fund class, you should focus on the ability to identify when a road's function has changed. So new significant roadways that may warrant arterial or collector status, that would be a trigger. Any principal arterial roadway reconstructed as a divided facility, construction of major development that has caused traffic patterns to change, significant growth, arterial or collector roadways that have been extended, and then, as we touched on, just significant growth in traffic volumes. All right, so we just wanted to throw out there for the districts, if you're adding new roads to RCI, they weren't previously in RCI. We just want you to be mindful of the district resources. When a new road is added to RCI, there are inventory impacts that are required for that roadway. So if you're adding 50 roads through this process, just know that you're gonna have to inventory those 50 roads. So just be mindful of the district resources there.
So in the upcoming slides, we will discuss do's and don'ts for adjusting urban area boundary. So on this slide, we can identify some of the major do's and don'ts when we are adjusting a given urban area boundary. So as you can see on the slide with the list of do's, at a minimum, we should confirm that census boundaries are adequate. Urban and rural demarcations should be defined by function and not just the urban area boundary. The roads that define a boundary should be consistently urban or rural. And at a minimum, the areas must encompass entire US Census Bureau urban area. Whenever possible, include the entire municipality, and the boundaries should not split roadways or ramps. As you can see in the right-hand side of the table with the list of don'ts, it's a big no to shrink the US Census Bureau urban areas. And it is very important that we don't ignore coordination of multi-state urban areas, as well as we should not ignore coordination of multi-district urban areas. So on this slide, as you can see, this is one of the common urban area adjustment error. We should make sure that the entire original census urban area is contained within the adjusted urban area boundary. This is demonstrated here with two examples on the screen. The example shown here is for the Jacksonville urban area. The purple area represents the census boundary, and the blue outline represents the urban area boundary. The example on the left shows the census boundary left out of the urban area, and right shows the corrected boundary. At a minimum, adjusted urban areas should contain the entire census boundary. This is another common urban area adjustment error. Multiple census urban areas should not be combined into one adjusted urban area boundary. Each urban area should have its own urban area boundary. The example on this slide shows 3 urban areas. The map on the left is an example of this, where 3 census boundaries were contained in one single urban area boundary. And as you can see, the correct version is on the right, where the map on the right provides a correct example where each of the 3 census boundaries are their own urban area boundary. This is the third most common urban area adjustment error. And over here, as you can see, only census urban areas with population greater than or equal to 5,000 are considered for FHWA's urban area boundaries. Do not adjust any urban areas with population less than 5,000. The example on the left includes an urban area with a population of 3,491, which is too small to be defined as such. The example on the right reflects the correct urban area with a population of 6,594. According to Federal Highway Administration, urban area boundaries must have a population of at least 5,000.
Functional classification, do's and don'ts. All right, so for the do's, you're going to use your common sense. That should always be your guide. You're going to look at the overall distribution and spacing when in doubt. Be consistent with your community standards. This is basically touching on, your local partners, leaning heavily on their desires. You're going to include the annual average daily traffic, so the traffic volumes when submitting fund class applications. You need to be coordinating with your state, district, and county counterparts to make sure those state, district, county lines are consistent. So if we have a minor collector in one county, it should continue through to the next county as a minor collector. And then RCI features 121 and 124 must be updated whenever changes occur, and they must complement each other. So feature 121 directly affects feature 112, and then the district should request TDA to update feature 112 through the LRS package process. For the don'ts, these are all directed toward the district and the LRS package process. For the first one, if the difference in length between the digitized and RCI alignments is greater than or equaled 1/10 of a mile or 5% of the RCI length, district should provide marked up aerials displaying the correct alignment for comparison with the RCI LRS. If a realignment of a roadway has not been digitized into the RCI LRS, the correct realignment should be shown on a copy of the latest aerial image. District should make sure the location of the realignment can be determined within the county by adding discerning features. RCI feature 140 must be coded correctly, and the total realignment length must be correctly noted in RCI. Feature 138 for realignments must be completed. Problems will occur if two or more section numbers are assigned to the same section of roadway or to overlapping roadways. If this is determined to be an exception, code it in properly. If not, the problem will need to be corrected by field or map review. So that's basically talking about roadway IDs, and we can't have the same roadway ID used twice for two sections, overlapping sections. All right, so now we'll go into a couple examples of real-world functional classification applications that were submitted to FHWA and approved. So this section was created as a truck route to relieve congestion on US 301 in Stark. The proposed roadway is expected to provide additional capacity for future traffic growth. You can see that it was originally an urban local, and then we requested an urban principal arterial other to match its US 301 alternate designation. And this got approved based on truck route congestion relief on US 301. So this one was an urban local to urban minor collector that got approved in the Orlando area. This submittal met trip purpose number 9, so the interconnection of minor thoroughfares. And this corridor also meets trip purpose 11, access to lower density urban residential and commercial industrialized areas. Additionally, this corridor provides secondary access to West Oaks Mall and Ocoee Elementary School. The corridor is a parallel relief road for State Road 438, which is an urban minor arterial, and State Road 50 urban principal arterial. So this one was an urban local to a urban minor arterial. This is a multimodal purpose. This roadway provides direct access to the Orlando International Airport and meets trip purpose 8, interconnection of a major thoroughfare. Here we've got the extension of a prior section. So going from urban local to urban principal arterial, this is the extension of Cimarron Boulevard. It meets trip purpose number 5, which is access to airports, seaports, and major rail terminals or intermodal facilities, and trip purpose 8, interconnection of major thoroughfares. For this last one, we're looking at land use. So this is the urban local to urban minor collector. This provides a multimodal connection, especially for pedestrians, to access an urban fixed guideway terminal on Florida's Strategic Intermodal System, the SIS. This is for the Cypress Creek Station of Tri-Rail for interregional travel. This meets the following criteria recommended in FHWA's Fund Class Procedure Guide. It is less than 3/4 of a mile and connected to a large trip generator. So the next couple slides, we go through the urban area boundary and functional classification data hub. This is where the districts can download the various data sets that we're providing. So the urban area boundaries, the functional classification, and then we'll also have various guidelines, and we'll have the handbook, the procedure, and training materials on this website. It's viewable by the public, and we have links to the 2010 maps that were signed off in 2014. This is where we're expecting the data to be submitted once it's adjusted by the districts. And then, like I mentioned, we're providing guidance from FDOT, the Census Bureau, and FHWA. This is the various data that's available on the site today. You have starting from the left to right, we have a story map. Basically gives you the how, the when, and the how of this decennial process, why we're doing what we're doing. The next map provides a 2010-2020 comparison tool. So there's a cool little slider where you can see the population changes. The third map provides the 2020 census by county, so just broken out by county boundaries. And then the last map is the existing functional classification, basically the real-time functional classification that we have in our database today. So for the 2010-2020 slider comparison tool, you can take your mouse and pull the glider there and go from left to right, and you'll see the 2020 data overlapping the 2010 data. And you can see the expansion and some of the shrinkage that occurred with the U.S. Census Bureau's survey process this time around. So it's a cool way to kind of show your counterparts what's going on in their area. This is a kind of a 10,000 foot level of the workflow for the entire urban area boundary and functional classification process. We acquire the data from FHWA, we adjust the data, the districts and the locals. TDA will review this data and submit it to FHWA for final approval. And then we mentioned the districts will submit the data through the Data Hub website, and only a select amount of users will have the ability to do so. And these are the users that you would reach out to in the district, in the FDOT districts. The local MPOs that are on this call, any of the counties. These are the point of contacts that you'd want to reach out to within FDOT to kick off your adjustment of the urban area boundaries and functional classification. This list isn't exactly who has access to submit the data to TDA. It's just who your point of contacts for each district are for this process. So here's a number of resources that we have. The first being the 2020 process website. We've been maintaining this website for it feels like 2 or 3 years now. This is where we were gearing up for the U.S. Census Bureau release, and then FHWA providing guidance. Next is the hub site, which we just covered, the data hub site, where you can grab the data. That touched on the 2010 maps that are available from 2014. Of course, FDOT has a handbook for urban area boundary and functional classification. There's a nice fact sheet. The little graphic on the left coincides with the fact sheet. Basically just gives you the how, what, and why of this process. Then we link to the FHWA 2013 guidance that provides a lot of the functional classification guidance. And then we have the FHWA's estimated schedule of activities, so 12 months for urban boundaries, 22 to 24 months for fund class, FHWA's FAQ section, and then finally the final urban area criteria from the U.S. Census Bureau, that federal register that they sent out. So these are your contacts moving forward for the TDA office, and any data related questions for the urban area boundary and functional classification process, reach out to Joel Worrell or myself, Jerry Scott. For any apportionment questions for your MPOs, you'll want to reach out to Mike Neidhart.